These are the most shocking, interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. A Chinese woman with bound feet is photographed in 1911. The binding process, started in early childhood, broke and tightly wrapped the bones to create an unnaturally small foot. This practice symbolized beauty and social status, but resulted in severe deformity and lifelong suffering. Japanese schoolchildren pose with a large humanoid robot in 1968. Built during Japan's rapid post-war modernization, such robots showcase the country's growing fascination with technology and automation. This early example of robotics in public life reflected both entertainment value and national pride in innovation. A man demonstrates rescue techniques using a resuscitation mannequin in Norway, 1970. The mannequin, designed for lifeguard and medical training, was created by Norwegian toymaker Åsmund S. Lærdal. This invention became one of the most widely used tools for teaching modern CPR around the world. American explorer Osa Johnson sits at a camp table in Kenya in 1933. Behind her stand local Maasai women, adorned with traditional jewelry and clothing. Osa and her husband Martin Johnson became famous for documenting African wildlife and cultures through films and photography. The entrance of Le Cabaret de Trouan in Montmartre, Paris, 1923. Its facade, covered with monstrous demons and twisted figures, shocked visitors before they even stepped inside. This surreal design turned the cabaret into one of the most notorious landmarks of Paris nightlife. This 1960s advertisement promotes the Vibra Finger, a handheld gum massager sold in the United States. Dentists recommended it at the time for stimulating gum tissue, improving circulation, and maintaining oral hygiene. Marketed as a modern dental gadget, it reflects the era's fascination with quirky health devices. A Russian soldier wears an early gas mask on the Eastern Front in 1916. Such primitive masks, made with simple filters, were developed in response to the first large-scale chemical weapon attacks of World War I. Despite their crude design, they became a symbol of the desperate measures soldiers used to survive poison gas on the battlefield. An experimental U.S. Air Force bomber was fitted with tank-like tracks instead of traditional landing gear in the 1950s. Engineers tested this unusual system to allow heavy aircraft to operate on soft or unpaved ground. Although the design worked in trials, it was ultimately abandoned in favor of more practical, wheel-based solutions. Divers prepared for descent aboard a ship in 1935. On the left stands a man in a massive atmospheric diving suit, designed to withstand extreme underwater pressure. Next to him is a diver in a more conventional suit, highlighting the experimental nature of deep-sea technology at the time. This is a French ventriloquist doll from 1964. It was built with a hinged jaw and glass eyes, used by entertainers in stage acts of the mid-20th century. Decades of decay stripped it of realism, turning a once popular performance tool into a disturbing artifact. A patient photographed at a mental asylum in Kerala, India, in 1901. Colonial medical institutions of the time often lacked proper treatment methods and documented patients, mainly for study. 3 women were photographed in Beirut, Lebanon, in 1892, under Ottoman rule. Such images were often produced in controlled brothels, where photography documented both the women and the institutions. This 1960s advertisement promotes Ready Bacon, a product designed to cook bacon directly in a household toaster. The bacon came pre-packaged in foil-lined sleeves to prevent grease from spilling onto the coils. Despite the novelty, the product was short-lived due to fire hazards and limited consumer appeal. French weightlifter Charles Rigoulot was arrested during World War II after striking a German officer. Imprisoned in a cell, he bent the iron bars with his bare hands and freed several fellow prisoners. Rigoulot then fought the guards, earning a reputation as both a champion athlete and a wartime resistor. Berlin, 1936. 2 Italian men stroll the streets during the year of the Nazi-hosted Olympic Games. The photo shows a rare, candid glimpse of foreign visitors against the backdrop of a tightly controlled Germany. The St. Denniston Mortuary was a coin-operated automaton built in Glasgow around 1900. Inserting a coin opened the doors to reveal miniature corpses inside a mortuary scene. It is one of the few surviving examples of Victorian-era machines designed to confront the public with death. People gather for ritual prayers at the Yamuna River in Delhi, India. The thick foam covering the surface is caused by untreated sewage and industrial discharge mixing with the water. Despite the pollution, the river remains one of the holiest sites in Hindu tradition. 15 soldiers of the 107th United States Colored Troops pose with rifles during the American Civil War, 1861. African-American regiments were first authorized in July 1862 and eventually made up 10% of the Union Army. Their service was critical both to the Union's victory and to advancing the cause of emancipation. Men stand outside a ticket booth for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in 1890. The traveling spectacle featured sharpshooter Annie Oakley, Lakota leader Sitting Bull, and other performers who drew massive crowds in the US and Europe. While wildly popular, the show promoted a romanticized and stereotyped version of the American frontier. Children take part in the White House Easter egg roll in 1898. The event began after Congress banned egg rolling on Capitol Hill in 1876 to protect the grounds. President Rutherford B. Hayes responded by opening the White House lawn, creating a tradition that continues today. 2 Secret Service agents are photographed in 1908. The agency was founded in 1865 to combat rampant counterfeiting, which made up nearly half of U.S. currency after the Civil War. Its role in presidential protection began only after the 1901 assassination of President William McKinley. Las Vegas in the early 1900s was a small desert railroad town with fewer than 1,000 residents. Its transformation began after the 1931 legalization of gambling in Nevada and the 1936 completion of the Hoover Dam, which brought workers and electricity. Today, the city is a global entertainment hub with over 150,000 hotel rooms and casinos, operating around the clock. Egyptian workers transport debris during the excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings. 1922, the discovery, led by Howard Carter and financed by Lord Carnarvon, became one of the most significant archaeological finds of the 20th century. Photographs by Harry Burton documented not only the treasures, but also the large Egyptian workforce that made the excavation possible. Adolf Hitler visits Paris on June 23, 1940, just days after France's surrender to Nazi Germany. He toured landmarks including the Eiffel Tower, accompanied by architect Albert Speer and sculptor Arno Breker. The brief visit symbolized German occupation, with Hitler leaving the city after only 3 hours. The Ohio River flood of January 1937 left most of Louisville, Kentucky, underwater. Nearly 70% of the city's residents were forced to evacuate, and over 175,000 people were displaced. It remains one of the deadliest and most destructive floods in U.S. history, prompting the creation of new federal flood control programs. Jim Morrison stands at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent in Teotihuacan, Mexico, early 1970s. The temple, dedicated to the deity Quetzalcoatl, is the 3rd largest pyramid at the site and notable for its carved serpent heads. Morrison frequently visited historical and spiritual locations during his travels in Mexico. Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight play Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on a Sega Mega Drive in the mid-1990s. The photograph was taken during a promotional gaming event that drew major celebrities. It captures the crossover between hip-hop culture and the booming video game industry of the decade. U.S. President Gerald Ford is photographed using chopsticks during a state visit to Japan in 1974. The trip marked the first official visit to Japan by a sitting American president. Ford's gesture symbolized cultural diplomacy during a period of strengthening U.S.-Japan relations. A U.S. Army nurse feeds a wounded soldier his Thanksgiving dinner in Korea, 1956. The photo was taken during the post-war years, when American military hospitals were still treating casualties from the Korean conflict. It highlights the role of military nurses in long-term recovery and morale support for injured servicemen. Astronaut Neil Armstrong is photographed eating dinner at home in 1966. At the time, he was training as part of NASA's Gemini program, which prepared astronauts for future Apollo missions. 3 years later, He would become the first human to set foot on the moon during Apollo 11. Crowds line up outside the first McDonald's in Moscow on January 31, 1990. More than 30,000 people attended the opening, a landmark moment during the final years of the Soviet Union. The restaurant became a powerful symbol of Western culture, entering everyday Soviet life. Soldiers of the 11th Battalion, Australian Imperial Force, pose on the Great Pyramid of Giza in Egypt on January 10, 1915. The unit was training in Egypt before being deployed to the Gallipoli campaign just 3 months later. This photograph has become one of the most iconic images of Australian troops during World War I. Piccadilly Circus in London is shown in the early 1900s alongside its modern appearance. Originally built in 1819, the junction quickly became a hub for traffic and commerce. Today, it is world famous for its illuminated billboards and status as a major tourist landmark. Adolf Hitler photographed during a private gathering at the Berghof in Bavaria, mid-1930s. The Berghof served as Hitler's mountain residence and a key site for informal meetings with Nazi leadership and foreign dignitaries. Rare color photos from this period offer a glimpse into the personal side of the regime's inner circle. Actor Eric Stoltz, on the set of Back to the Future in 1985, originally cast as Marty McFly. After several weeks of filming, producers decided to replace him with Michael J. Fox, believing Stoltz didn't fit the comedic tone of the role. The rare behind-the-scenes photos of Stoltz remain a glimpse into what the film could have looked like with a different lead. A Nazi party gathering photographed in December 1941, decorated for a Christmas celebration. Such events were used by the regime for propaganda, blending traditional holidays with political messaging. Rare color images like this reveal how even cultural festivities were co-opted for ideological purposes during World War II. Soviet ground crew preparing to load Fab 100 bombs onto a Petlyakov P-2 dive bomber of the Northern Fleet Air Force in 1942. Reindeer-drawn sleds were often used for transporting munitions and supplies across the Arctic terrain. This unusual combination of modern aviation and traditional transport highlights the logistical adaptations of the Eastern Front during World War II. A German officer using a field telephone during World War I between 1914 and 1916. Germany was the first country to deploy field telephones on a large scale, allowing real-time communication between units. These devices had a range of up to 20 kilometers on two-wire lines, though significantly less when using Earth return systems. In 1971, a cement truck overturned near Winganen, Oklahoma, and the mixer was too heavy to remove. The abandoned drum remained in place for decades, becoming a local landmark. Residents later painted it to resemble a NASA space capsule, turning the accident site into roadside folk art. This is the Mount Washington Cog Railway in New Hampshire, opened in 1869 as the world's first mountain climbing cog railway. It allowed trains to ascend slopes as steep as 37%, impossible for conventional railroads. The line is still in operation today, making it a living monument of 19th century engineering. This photo shows Times Square in 1947 with the Astor Theater at 1537 Broadway featuring the secret life of Walter Mitty. The Astor was one of New York's most iconic movie palaces, drawing crowds for decades. It was demolished in 1982 to make way for the Marriott Marquis Hotel. In 1968, Vo Thi Tong, a young Vietnamese revolutionary, was sentenced to 20 years of hard labor by the South Vietnamese government. Instead of showing fear or despair, she turned to the camera and smiled, an act that became a powerful symbol of defiance. Her photo was later celebrated across Vietnam as the smile of victory, inspiring generations during the war. In 1972 London, sandwich shops offered an incredible variety at prices that seem unbelievable today. Favorites like ham or roast beef cost just 13p, while a simple egg and tomato went for 10p. This snapshot captures the everyday food culture of Britain before the fast food boom took over. In 1951, Gustav Håkansson, at age 66, was denied entry to Sweden's 1,764-kilometer race for being too old. He rode unofficially, skipping mandatory sleep breaks, and still beat the official competitors by more than a day. Nicknamed Stallfarfar, Super Grandpa, he kept cycling until the age of 100. Russian aviator Pyotr Krisanov warrant officer of the 4th Siberian Air Detachment, stands beside his Newport 4 in the winter of 1915. He earned all 4 classes of the St. George Cross, one of Imperial Russia's highest military honors. Krisanov was killed in 1917 during World War I after a dogfight against 2 enemy aircraft. Alberto Santos Dumont piloting his 14 bis Oiseau de Proie II during its historic flight in Paris, 1906. This marked the first officially observed heavier-than-air-powered flight in Europe, with the aircraft flying 60 meters without ramps, catapults, or wind assistance. The feat secured Santos Dumont the Archdeacon Prize, solidifying his place in aviation history. A Russian woman stands in despair as her home burns during the German invasion of the Soviet Union in 1942. Entire villages were destroyed in scorched earth tactics and reprisals, leaving millions displaced. This image captures the civilian suffering that paralleled the brutal Eastern Front battles of World War II. October 1962. Fans scaling the fence at Candlestick Park in San Francisco to catch a glimpse of the World Series between the San Francisco Giants and the New York Yankees. With tickets sold out, determined spectators found creative ways to witness one of baseball's most iconic matchups of the era. German soldiers using a tank to cross a river in the Soviet Union, August 3, 1942. The destroyed bridge above them highlights the intense fighting on the Eastern Front, where infrastructure was often deliberately demolished to slow advancing armies. This image captures both the ingenuity and desperation of mechanized warfare during Operation Barbarossa. Women assembling mortar bombs at the Swan Electric Company in Wellington, New Zealand during World War II, circa 1939-1945. With much of the male workforce serving overseas, women filled vital roles in munitions factories, producing the weapons and ammunition that kept the Allied war effort supplied. Grand Canal, Venice, Italy, circa 1970. A Venetian man is seen driving a heavy wooden pole, known as a bricola, into the canal bed, which serves as a mooring post for boats. This traditional method of planting poles has been used for centuries to anchor gondolas and other vessels in Venice's waterways. Berlin Raid, November 23, 1943. RAF Sterling bomber crew being debriefed by intelligence officers after returning from a night mission over the German capital, part of the Allies' strategic bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. Wall Street, New York City, 1907. A massive crowd gathers during the bankers' panic, a financial crisis sparked by the collapse of trust companies, which led to bank runs and was only stabilized by J.P. Morgan's private intervention. Albert Tangora, 1923. At just 18 to 20 years old, Tangora set the world record for the fastest typing speed on a manual typewriter, an astonishing 141 words per minute, achieved on October 22, 1923. Despite many later attempts with improved machines, his record remained unmatched for decades, cementing his place in typing history. Florence Cathedral in the 1860s, still without its facade. Although the dome was completed in 1436, the front remained unfinished until an international competition in 1864, with the current facade completed in 1887. Canyon Diablo, Arizona, late 1800s. The town grew when railroad construction stalled at a deep canyon, but with no law enforcement, it became notorious for violence. It was abandoned after the bridge was finally completed about 10 years later. Japan, 1978. Crowds line up outside a theater for the release of Star Wars. The film opened in Japan a year after its U.S. premiere, drawing record-breaking audiences. Its success helped spark a global fan culture that continues today. December 31, 1999. Boris Yeltsin shocked the nation by resigning early and leaving the Kremlin. Power passed to Vladimir Putin, who became acting president that very day. This moment closed Russia's turbulent 1990s and opened a new political era. In 1978, U.S. President Jimmy Carter and West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt reviewed NATO troops in Germany. The show of force came at the height of Cold War tensions with the Soviet Union. Rows of tanks and soldiers symbolized NATO's united front in Europe. On November 25, 1963, Jackie Kennedy attended the state funeral of President John F. Kennedy in Washington, D.C. She walked with foreign leaders, including Charles de Gaulle, symbolizing global recognition of the event. The folded U.S. flag she carried later became one of the most enduring symbols of her public strength. Times Square was buried under 26.4 inches, 67 centimeters of snow during the Great Blizzard of December 26-27, 1947. With no wind to disperse it, the snow piled up in drifts that paralyzed New York City for days. Subways ran, but surface traffic froze, creating one of the city's most memorable standstills. Abraham Lincoln sits with his youngest son, Thomas Tad Lincoln, in 1864. Tad was deeply attached to his father and often spent time with him inside the White House during the Civil War. He died in 1871 at the age of 18, 6 years after Lincoln's death. Fidel Castro photographed in New York Central Park, 1955. At the time, he was a young lawyer seeking support for his political movement in Cuba. Just a few years later, he would return to international attention as the leader of the Cuban Revolution. Rocky Johnson, professional wrestler, with his young son Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in the late 1970s. Rocky was a major star in the wrestling world and became the first black champion in WWE history. His son would later rise to global fame as one of the most successful wrestlers and actors of all time. Bruce Lee and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the set of Game of Death, 1972. The 5'8" martial arts icon faced off against his 7'2" student in one of cinema's most famous fight scenes. The film was completed posthumously in 1978, cementing Lee's legacy worldwide. The icebreaker Baikal, cutting through the frozen surface of Lake Baikal in the early 1900s. Built in 1897 in England and assembled in Siberia, it was Russia's first icebreaking ferry. The ship played a key role in transporting trains and passengers across the lake before the Circumbaikal Railway was completed. Preparation for the launch of Big Joe at Cape Canaveral, 1959. The Atlas D rocket carried a Mercury spacecraft mock-up on September 9, 1959. Its mission was to test the ablative heat shield under conditions close to orbital re-entry. Ben Lilly, famed outdoorsman and hunting guide, photographed in 1907. He became known for his tracking skills and guided Theodore Roosevelt on a Louisiana bear hunt. Lilly was legendary for living much of his life in the wilderness, hunting with hounds and simple gear. Ty Cobb slides into home plate in 1920, showcasing his famously aggressive base running. Known as the Georgia Peach, Cobb set records for stolen bases and runs scored that stood for decades. His ferocity on the field made him both feared and admired in early baseball history. Artifacts linked to the events at Ford's Theater in April 1865 include weapons carried by John Wilkes Booth and his associates. Among them are revolvers, knives, and Booth's riding boot, along with the bullet removed during President Lincoln's autopsy. These items became part of the preserved evidence documenting one of the most pivotal moments in American history. The Ovitz family, a group of entertainers from Romania, were deported during World War II. Because of their unusual condition, they were kept together inside the camp, instead of being separated. They all survived, making them the largest known family to leave intact after the war. These are examples of Victorian-era staircases, often built extremely narrow and steep. Their design saved space in tightly constructed homes, but made them difficult and risky to climb. Many such staircases have since been removed or reinforced due to safety concerns. French soldiers rest inside a damaged church near Saint-Mihiel, France, in 1916. They gathered around a small fire for warmth during one of the harshest years of World War I. The Battle of Saint-Mihiel later became one of the key operations involving American forces in 1918. View from the radio operator's position inside a Messerschmitt Bf-110 cockpit, November 1940. The twin-engine heavy fighter was widely used during the early campaigns over Western Europe. Its design combined long range with multiple crew roles, making it a key aircraft in the Luftwaffe at the time. Japanese soldiers on trial in Burma, 1946. They were charged with atrocities committed against a village population during the war. The proceedings were part of the broader post-war military tribunals across Asia. This is a fluting iron, a Victorian-era household tool used to press decorative pleats into fabric. Heated on a stove, it allowed collars, cuffs, and ruffles to be crimped into uniform folds. Such devices were especially popular in the late 19th century, reflecting the fashion for finely detailed garments. A timeline of Winston Churchill's hats, spanning from 1895 to 1957. The collection shows his wide variety of headwear, from military helmets and aviation gear to formal top hats and iconic Homburgs. It reflects both his changing roles and his unmistakable personal style across 6 decades. The Kalinin K-12, an experimental tailless bomber prototype, photographed in 1937. Its unusual feather-like camouflage was created specifically for the Tushino Air Parade. Designed by Konstantin Kalinin, the aircraft showcased bold Soviet aviation experiments of the era. Richard Melville Hall, better known as Moby, posing in New York City, 1987. The playful forced perspective shot makes him appear to pinch the top of the Empire State Building. He later shared the photo with the caption, "When I was 5,000 feet tall and had hair." Belgian soldiers with dog-drawn machine gun carts during the Battle of the Frontiers, 1914. The Belgian army was one of the few in Europe to rely on dogs for pulling light artillery. These teams proved especially useful on narrow roads and rough terrain early in World War I. Walt Disney with Werner von Braun in California, 1954. Von Braun, a leading rocket engineer, collaborated with Disney Studios in the 1950s as technical director for 3 television films about space exploration. These projects helped popularize space travel to the American public years before the space race peaked. President John F. Kennedy with his children celebrating Halloween in the Oval Office, White House, 1963. The costumes added a playful moment to one of the most formal rooms of American politics. This photograph captures a rare blend of presidential duty and family life. A German soldier wearing experimental body armor, 1916. The design could transform into a small shielded position with a mounted rifle. It reflected early attempts to combine personal protection with mobile firepower during World War I. A Soviet exit visa issued in 1984. Such documents were required for citizens of the USSR to travel abroad, strictly regulating international movement. The process often involved lengthy approvals and heavy state control. Robert Wadlow, later known as the tallest man in recorded history, pictured with his father in 1929 at age 10. At this time, he already stood 6 feet 6 inches. Now 1.98 moles, tall. His extraordinary growth was caused by an overactive pituitary gland. A seasonal flood in August 1916 tears through an arched bridge in Tegucigalpa, Honduras. Crowds gathered on both banks to witness the destructive power of the rising river. The disaster highlighted the city's vulnerability to extreme weather during the rainy season. Edith Piaf with French prisoners of war in Germany, 1944. During her visit, she posed for group photos with inmates, later used to create forged identity papers. These documents helped several captives escape captivity under the guise of traveling with her troupe. New York City, 1939. Women take part in self-defense courses designed to teach practical techniques against physical aggression. Such programs grew in popularity before World War II, reflecting a broader movement for women's independence and safety in urban life. Italy, 17th century. A mechanical toy called the Chained Demon, created by inventor Manfredo Setalla, combines artistry with early clockwork engineering. Settalla's automata fascinated Renaissance audiences, blending science, spectacle, and symbolism. The Neamț Monastery in Romania, founded in the 15th century, kept the skulls of monks as part of its memorial tradition. Each skull was inscribed with names and dates, and some were painted with detailed portraits. This practice reflected Orthodox customs of honoring the dead while preserving their memory within the monastery walls. The Rolls-Royce 1920 pattern-armored car was an upgraded version of the famous WWI model built on the Silver Ghost chassis. It served in the British Empire's overseas campaigns and later in the Irish Army, where it remained in service for decades. The vehicle in the photo, named Sliab na Mban, became iconic for its role in Irish history and was still operational as late as 1960. Gail Halverson, later known as the Candy Bomber, prepares small parachutes with sweets for children in West Berlin, 1949. During the Berlin airlift, he began dropping chocolate, gum, and raisins to kids as planes landed every 90 seconds at Tempelhof. His gesture grew into Operation Little Vittles, delivering over 23 tons of candy and becoming a symbol of hope during the blockade. A pile of eyeglasses taken from prisoners at Auschwitz, 1945. Each pair represents a life affected by deportation to the camp. Such images were documented after liberation, revealing the scale of what occurred there. Children caught stealing turnips in Scotland, 1911. A policeman records the incident while the girl hides her face in shame. Food shortages often drove poor families' children to small thefts like this. Alexander Kuprin, with his wife in Balaclava, 1909. The writer was preparing for an experimental dive in one of the earliest Russian-made diving suits. He later shared his impressions in essays, combining literature with real technological progress. A small waterproof container with 5 metal tubes inside, 20th century. Such cases were used to securely store and transport industrial ignition components. Their compact design made them resistant to moisture and suitable for field conditions. Ornithologist Jerry McGahan with a 6-month-old Andean condor, 1971. Even at this age, the bird's wingspan already exceeded 3 meters, making it one of the largest flying birds in the world. McGahan studied the species in the Andes, documenting its growth and flight behavior in detail. Women casting their ballots in New York, 1920. The 19th Amendment had just granted American women the right to vote nationwide. This moment marked the first time millions of women officially participated in a U.S. election. In a 1952 episode of I Love Lucy, a Los Angeles bakery crafted an enormous loaf of bread specifically for the gag. The scene became one of the show's most memorable kitchen mishaps. After filming, the bread was divided and enjoyed by the cast, crew, and live studio audience. The circular military harbor of Carthage, built in the 3rd century BCE, could house over 200 warships. At its center stood an island with an admiral's command post for overseeing naval operations. Today, the remains of this once strategic port can still be seen near Tunis, offering a glimpse of its unique design. Sony Watchman, released in 1984, was one of the first portable pocket televisions. It featured a 2-inch black and white CRT screen, an antenna for picking up VHF/UHF signals, and ran on batteries, making TV mobile decades before smartphones. The device became a cultural icon of the 1980s, symbolizing the beginning of handheld entertainment. Tattooed Family, 1910. At this time, heavily tattooed performers were part of traveling circuses across Europe and America, earning a living by exhibiting their bodies as living canvases. Full-body tattooing in the early 20th century required hundreds of hours of work with hand-powered machines, making such displays extremely rare and valuable for public shows. Apache Woman with Child, 1898. The infant rests in a traditional cradle board, a wooden frame used by Apache mothers for safety and mobility. These cradle boards not only protected children, but also carried cultural meaning through design and decoration. British archaeologist Leonard Woolley and his wife Catherine during excavations in Mesopotamia, 1920s. They uncovered ancient pottery drainage pipes, evidence of advanced urban engineering. Woolley's work at revealed one of the earliest known cities of human civilization. Pawnee women and children at a campsite in Oklahoma, 1886. One woman is preparing an animal hide, an important step for making clothing and shelter. Behind them stand a teepee and a traditional earth-covered lodge, reflecting the tribe's transition between seasonal housing. The Pawnee were skilled hunters and farmers, central to the culture of the Great Plains. Advertisement for a Levitt & Sons suburban home, the Philadelphia Inquirer, July 20th, 1958. The 4-bedroom, 2-bath house was priced at $11,990, with payments of $87 a month. These affordable homes were part of the post-war suburban boom, driven by mass production methods and the GI Bill, which helped millions of American families move from cities to rapidly built communities like Levittown, New Jersey. Testing of the Holt Caterpillar prototype tank in the United States, 1917, just before America entered World War I. Built by Holt Manufacturing, later Caterpillar Inc., the vehicle was one of the earliest American attempts at tracked armored warfare. Although never adopted for combat, its design influenced later U.S. and Allied armored development. U.S. .45 Kale, M1911 pistol with extended magazine and brass catching cage. In the early days of WI, an aircraft didn't have machine guns. Enemy pilots would shoot at each other with pistols. The cage prevented the spent shells from ejecting onto the cockpit floor and interfere with the foot controls. Sergeant Stubby, WWI. This stray dog became the mascot of the U.S. 102nd Infantry Regiment. He served 18 months on the front, took part in 17 battles, warned of incoming gas attacks, and located wounded soldiers. After the war, Stubby became a celebrated hero and lived until 1926. Soldiers celebrating the armistice, November 11, 1918. After more than 4 years of fighting, World War I officially ended at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month. Across the Western Front, soldiers cheered, sang, and tossed their helmets in relief, marking the end of what was then called the War to End All Wars. Ellie Mae and Miss Hathaway on the set of The Beverly Hillbillies, 1962. The sitcom, which debuted the same year, quickly became one of the most popular TV shows in America. Its mix of rural humor and Hollywood satire drew record-breaking audiences, with the Clampett family's cement pond swimming pool becoming one of the show's most famous running gags. Farm boy drinking soda at a general store, Lamoille, Iowa, 1939. Photographed by Arthur Rothstein for the Farm Security Administration, this image shows an early soda vending machine stocked with glass bottles. Such rural stores were not just shops, but community hubs during the Great Depression, where modern conveniences like bottled soda became small luxuries. Dedication of the Lincoln Memorial, Washington, D.C., May 30th, 1922. After 8 years of construction, the monument was unveiled before a massive crowd. Among the attendees was Robert Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's only surviving son, making it a rare living link to the 16th president. Adolf Hitler greeting President Paul von Hindenburg at the Potsdam Garrison Church, March 21, 1933. The event, known as the Day of Potsdam, symbolically linked the old Imperial Army with the new Nazi regime, just weeks after Hitler was appointed Chancellor. An M1917 tank on the streets of Lexington, Kentucky, February 1920. U.S. Army troops were deployed to restore order after violent unrest broke out during the trial of Will Lockett. Dunkirk, 1940. Thousands of British and Allied troops wait on the beaches during Operation Dynamo, the evacuation that rescued more than 330,000 soldiers from northern France between May 26 and June 4, 1940. Dawson City, Yukon, 1900. During the Klondike Gold Rush, ladies of the evening posed as lumber workers in stage photos. Dawson's population exploded from 500 in 1896 to over 30,000 by 1898. and the red light district thrived alongside miners' camps, saloons, and dance halls. New York City subway, 1950s. Passengers ride the IND 8th Avenue line A Express. In this era, subway fare was just 15 cents. Trains were not air-conditioned, and graffiti had not yet appeared. The wooden bench seating and enamel signage reflect the system's original 1930s design, still in daily use by mid-century. U.S. troops disembarking, Philippines, 1899. American soldiers arrived during the Philippine-American War, 1899-1902, a conflict sparked after the Spanish-American War when the U.S. annexed the Philippines. Over 126,000 U.S. troops were eventually sent. The war, marked by guerrilla fighting and harsh counterinsurgency, cost more than 200,000 Filipino lives, mostly civilians, and established U.S. colonial rule until 1946. Don't forget to subscribe to the second channel with the same content using the link in the description.